A new feature story for the July issue of The Atlantic titled How to Tell the American Story. Our next guest argues that finding a common history that is both unsparing and unifying has proven all but impossible in recent years, but it shouldn't be. Joining us now, the author of that piece, Deputy Executive Editor at The Atlantic, Yoni Applebaum. And Yoni, in your piece, you write in part, quote, for more than 2 centuries, our creedal nationalism has been a source of strength, binding together Americans of diverse faiths and backgrounds. But lately, we have discovered that it's also a vulnerability. A nation defined by blood and soil, built around a shared religion or ethnicity, can survive divergent narratives. To a country built on an idea, though, and bound together by a shared understanding of our history, the inability to tell a common story might well prove fatal. Unable to agree on how to tell our story, we have swiftly abandoned efforts to tell it at all. The hours devoted to social studies in schools are shrinking, and survey courses in American history are vanishing from college campuses. The signature event of the nation's 250th birthday might prove to be not a keynote speech or a patriotic pageant, but a no-holds-barred UFC fight on the South Lawn of the White House. It's our 250th birthday, and no one seems to know what we're celebrating. Yoni, I'll add, but I'd love for you to tell us more about what you mean here. That we're going to be watching people fight on stage with thousands of people screaming for it at the White House. That's how we're celebrating this nation's 250th. I personally find it to be sick and twisted, but maybe I'm alone here. Take it away.
Lots of Americans enjoy fighting and watching these bouts, and that's fine, but it's a pretty odd way for a democracy to celebrate its 250th birthday. We just had a clip of the president, in this 250th anniversary year, trashing the processes of American democracy and insulting the constitutional liberties like freedom of the press. We're in a pretty strange spot. On the left, there's a real inclination to talk only about the things this country has done wrong, and it's not a short list. And on the right, there's a new willingness to tear down placards and censor any mention of those same things, of the things America has done wrong. And we're losing that common sense of purpose, the idea that there is a basic narrative that you can tell about this country, and it's a pretty inspirational narrative. It's a narrative that says this was a country founded on a set of ideals to be a new sort of place in the world, and that those ideals are aspirational. We've never entirely succeeded in living up to them. Maybe we never will, but they're still worth fighting for. And I think that was, as I reported this, what really came home to me was the extent to which most Americans have internalized that basic narrative about the country. And most of their leaders and most of the folks who are writing about history and most of the politicians out there are no longer really bought into it the way that most Americans are.
Yeah, Yoni, was there a way in this year with this president in this particularly divided time for that narrative to have been told in Washington? Are you saying that this is really just Trump, and that had another president been in this position on the 250th anniversary of the founding of the country, they would have found a way to rise above some of the divisions that we know are out there in the country, but that another president could have done this differently? Let's
stipulate that Donald Trump makes everything about himself and therefore everything divisive. But when Joe Biden was in the White House, his 250th commission also failed. Rather than come up with central unifying events or any sort of a coherent narrative, they sort of had a choose-your-own-adventure 250th. They had downloadable kits that local institutions could use to brand things they were doing anyway as affiliated with the 250th. They encouraged Americans to record their own stories on the premise that each of us has our own story about the country. Those are fine things to do, but there was a gaping void at the center there. The Democrats were not able to tell a story about this country that Americans could buy into. And then Donald Trump comes along, and he tells a story about the country that MAGA buys into. But it's a story that I think is fundamentally at odds with how Americans have mostly understood themselves and their country to this point.
But, Yoni, one of the things that this piece makes clear that you just articulated there is that America's defining feature, if anything, is that it is an idea. It is premised on ideas. It is not premised on blood and soil, as you wrote. And when John is talking about how the things that feel like we're missing, these guardrails, these norms, that too is part of the American idea. And so how does that, if you're thinking about this as a political strategist, how does that get sold to a country that has been told you're losing your country to people who don't actually have stakes in it? How do you communicate the power of an idea in an age where abstraction is losing to fear and to blood and to soil?
Back in 1862, a woman named Julia Ward Howe wrote a poem and sent it to The Atlantic and said, would you guys publish this? And we put it back on our cover this month, The Battle Hymn of the Republic. And the message of that poem was, this is a country worth fighting for. The ideas at the heart of this country are worth fighting for. And she knew perfectly well in the middle of the Civil War that not every American agreed with her on that, that this was contentious. But I think that what you're pointing to is that Americans really are hungry for the articulation of a set of values, a set of principles, of a set of ideals that they can buy into, that the left has largely abandoned that project in favor of critique. And it opens a void for the kind of divisive blood and soil nationalism that Donald Trump and those around him favor, because people do want something to believe in. They want a country to call their own. And to the extent that the mainstream story falls away, that we stop defining ourselves around an idea, it opens a chance for people to come in and exploit the divisions within this country and encourage people to think of it as a tribal society rather than a creedal one.
The new piece for the July issue of The Atlantic is available to read online now.